What's up, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing oh my gosh, sorry, some water. Edgardo Miranda-Rodriguez. Dude, thank you
What's
so much
up,
for
Omar?
joining.
What's up, Omar? How are you doing, Uncanny Omar?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us and talking about your project, your book, and how all this came together and how people can help out. And a big thank you to Jordan for putting this meeting together. This is all found through Zoop. I put the link in the description of the video, and I'll be sharing it throughout the stream. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, just had a De La Soul skit reference for a second right there. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I'm a graphic novelist. I've been self-publishing my own stories now for 7 years. Prior to that, I was more of a graphic novel producer, serving as editor-in-chief for Daryl Makes Comics, an imprint I co-founded with Daryl McDaniels of Run DMC.
Yeah.
I've also produced comic book series for John Leguizamo, his adaptation of his second award-winning Broadway play, Freak, and an original intellectual property he developed with his friends called Phenomex. And that one I was able to negotiate a distribution deal with Todd McFarlane over at Image for John. And then prior to that, I've had a lot of experience with Marvel, working with Axel Alonso and Joe Quesada, producing exhibitions. That was my formal introduction into the comic book industry. For goodness, 20, 21, 22 years now, I've been a graphic designer, doing my own design studio, Somos Arte. Over the years, I've kind of evolved into the role of creative director, working on projects for local nonprofits here in New York City and nationally with corporate clients like Atlantic Records, Sony Pictures, Marvel, and everything from branding to event production to video production. I've had a hand in doing, but I kind of have multiple roles now with La Borinqueña, which is my own IP that I've been publishing now for 7 years. And with La Borinqueña, I serve as, editor-in-chief, publisher, writer. I do my own marketing and publicity for this project. My partner and wife, Kyungjan Miranda, she serves as the studio's business director, handling all business that comes in for our studio, but she also heads up our philanthropic division of Somos Arte. And over the course of these few years that we've been self-publishing La Borinqueña, we've collaborated with DC Comics, with NRDC's Natural Resource Defense Council and Rosario Dawson, corporate brands like Sony Pictures, Caribe Hilton, local brands in Puerto Rico like Chocolate Cortez, to do a lot of collaborative work to raise money for our philanthropic work in Puerto Rico. And so far, we've raised about $200,000 for our philanthropic work, which sets us apart from any other superhero series that exists, because charity has been part of our project since the first issue was published in December 2016, and it continues to be. So a lot of our work is very much committed to social justice, but from a philanthropic perspective. So so I like, I'm very old school. I come from this world watching PBS every time they had their fundraisers, and they're like, donate now and get a tote bag, get a mug, or get this beautiful boxed edition of fill in the blank. So I love the model of getting people something in their hands to feel that not only that they are supporting our work, but they physically have something to show off to others. Hey, look at this book I got. I actually am helping out by actually owning this book and, buying this book for others. So it's kind of like a very cool way of taking something that many of us in comic book collecting and reading and culture do already and adding a purpose to it.
So how did all this begin for you? Were you a comic book reader growing up, or did you get into it later on in life, or graphic designer first, and then you just stumbled upon the world of comics?
So I've been reading comics. I have long boxes that go back to the 80s. I have always loved the world of sequential art, the world of episodic storytelling. You know, by the time I was at the age of 18, I'd lived in 22 different places throughout New York City, Puerto Rico, Pennsylvania, Central New York. And having these comics for me were the only stable community friendships, so-called friendships that I had. Peter Parker went with me everywhere. You know, the X-Men went with me everywhere. I knew that wherever I ended up, wherever I landed, if I found a comic book shop, a pharmacy, or any place that had a spinner rack, I could get that next issue that I missed last month, or rather continued from last month of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, or the Uncanny X-Men. And that's what I did. I literally, like, if there was like a GPS marker for my comic book collection, it would literally show where all these issues came from. You know, I'm visualizing right now. I could see myself buying the Wolverine limited series that Frank Miller and Chris Claremont worked on, picking up one issue at a newsstand at a train station, picking up another issue at this kind of like cigar shop in my neighborhood, picking up another issue at an actual comic shop, wherever I landed. So comic books have always been a part of my life. I grew up a nerd in New York City. That was how I survived this era that many who follow New York City refer to as the Bronx is burning. ESPN did an incredible documentary about that. And I survived a building that was arsoned. And I literally lived through this culling of Black and brown people in New York City when landlords were trying to collect insurance money because they just didn't want to have tenants that were of color working for families. And so they weren't fixing our homes. And leaky faucets, try cracked ceilings, right? And so this was a reality. Comic books for me kind of like validated this idea that we did not need to settle. The superheroes that I really followed, I didn't follow a multi-billionaire who dons a costume. I find that ludicrous to this day that a billionaire would actually like, well, then again, it could be like George Lopez said in the trailer for Blue Beetle. Maybe Batman is a fascist. I don't know. But I mean, I do like Batman stories. But the joke is that the reality is that characters like Peter Parker really spoke to me. He was a working class, orphan kid raised by his aunt. And he was the everyman under that mask. He was just this Jewish kid from Queens. And his story spoke to me. And I love that no matter what level of villainy or just a no good, very bad, terrible day that he had, he still found a way to overcome that and try to make the world better for those around him. And that's kind of like what comics did for me. You know, they validated me. I had this relationship with these characters. Wherever I went, I knew that every month I could still catch up with Peter to find out what was going on with him. And it was something that always did speak to me. And whether I could afford it or not, I would collect bottles and cans to save up enough money to buy comics. And ironically, when that was the kind of like the source of income that a poor kid had, decades later, you still literally get a nickel for the same bottle or can. But back then, I could buy a comic book for anywhere from 50 to 75 cents. You know what I mean?
Dude, I did the same thing. My brother and I, we'd get a busted up like wheelbarrow or one of those Red Riders we found somebody was throwing away and load it up with cans and sometimes paper, but paper didn't pay that much, or plastic, and go to the recycling to flip over there. And then go to the comic book store or the flea market or yard sales or the pharmacy or whoever was selling comics. We would do the same thing with I would take the neighbor's trash out and they give me coins, like nickels and dimes, whatever, right? I'd haul it because we lived in apartment complexes. You did whatever. But you're right, man. It's not like inflation went up with jobs like that, right? It's not like you could still get more money for recycling cans and bottles and things like that. It's that brought back a lot of memories, what you just said.
You're like the first dude to actually kind of like share that experience with me. I mean, I think it's a coincidence that we're both brown, right? But the reality is that
That's
You
true.
know,
Bro.
I mean, like that we're a huge demographic that have always loved and supported this industry, whether we see ourselves or reflected or even saw our names in the masthead. You know what I mean? Let alone, it's one thing to be like seeing ourselves as the protagonist, and another thing to actually see our names, you know, with all the vowels in the masthead, you know. And I think that
Yeah, I remember
one of the reasons why I got into comics, you know, and I did my best to kind of like find the few Latins out there that were doing their thing. And, you know, I was very fortunate to early on connect with Joe Quesada and with Axel Alonso. And, you know, there was a lot of synergy between us, you know what I mean? And like, you know, they were obviously where they were in the industry as editor-in-chief of Marvel, you know, literally like top of the food chain. But they very clearly recognized and understood that they were literally the only brown people up there. You know what I mean? And like, I would speak to Joe about him growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens. And he was like, look, I grew up around Colombians, Dominicans, Black people. Or Axel Alonso would share, you know, I grew up around Black people in the Bay Area. Like this was like a reality, seeing themselves as people of color, but they knew very well that the industry didn't reflect their childhood, their experience. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of like why I had the opportunities that I did, but I also brought something different to Marvel and comics and nobody was doing. You know, Patrick Reed, you know, shout out to Patrick Reed and what he's been doing with this current Spider-Man show that's touring the country. And then it actually opened last year at the first official event of the San Diego Comic-Con Museum, right? And now it's just recently opened in Kansas City. But, you know, that's 2023. In 2007 and 2009, nobody was making art shows dedicated 100% to comic book art, to sequential art. You know, collecting pieces from collectors or from agents or from artists themselves. Nobody was doing it back then. And I'm actually still doing it even with my art. I have an exhibition that's touring nationally. It just closed recently at the Pennsylvania College of Art and Design. And prior to that, it was on Long Island and Nassau Community College. Meanwhile, I had another show at Boston University, and we're in discussion about bringing the show to in the future to Chicago, again to Boston and other cities, because I see the value and the impact that physically being around art makes, right? Particularly like sequential art, because comic books, you know, they're produced for deadlines. They're produced for like, you know, efficiency. They're not produced to kind of like sit on a comfortable bench in a gallery and just kind of like sit there for a good 30 to 60 minutes to just contemplate. You know what I mean? I mean, it takes artists anywhere from a day to 3 days to do a page. And what, it takes us like a few seconds to go through a page when we actually read them in the comics. So a lot of the work that I do is really like, you know, I find the need for equity on multiple levels. Equity to give artists an opportunity to be celebrated as actual visual artists. Equity in the space as people of color, how we're underrepresented. Equity in the space that the work that I can do can develop some sort of like, you know, revenue stream to do charity work.
And okay, so I've seen this character that that you have created and brought to life, and it's really interesting. When Jordan hit me up, I thought this was a really cool idea that you were bringing it to a collected edition, like stories that have been previously published before. And you sound like you had the same experience I did as far as like comics and escaping the comics to get away from the reality of life. And that's why I think I gravitated a lot towards characters like the X-Men and characters like that. So,
I mean, it's trippy that there was never an original like X-Men that was Latin, if you think about it, right? You know,
well, I mean, okay, well, yeah, I talk about this all the time. So, yeah, back in the day, we didn't grow up with representation, so it was like I gravitated towards characters like Storm or Scrooge McDuck or Wolverine, characters that didn't look like me. Now it's like really cool to see kids of another generation look at X-Men, look at Justice League, and look at characters that look like them. We didn't have that growing up, so you know we
or to have characters, right, that are kind of like, I mean, let's use like corporate industry jargon to talk about intellectual properties, right? Rebranding, looking at characters, and you know, a lot of purists get a little triggered when a character is rebranded and reintroduced. But you know, the reality is my sons are growing up with Miles Morales. I'm a Peter Parker and they're a Miles Morales. That's just that, you know, this is talking about children, you know what I mean? And I'm definitively like of a certain generation if my Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And for them, it's like, yo, Spider-Man, he's made 2 movies, and the last movie was 5 years ago. And if you're 7 years old, that's an eternity.
Oh my gosh, I know. I remember when my kids were that little and they were like, when's the next Guardians of the Galaxy coming out? Like in a month or so?
Right. And like my oldest son is 19, man. What is that? The whole Marvel Cinematic Universe is like what, 15?
Right. They grew up with that stuff. It's crazy to think about that.
Yeah, man.
Man, that's crazy. So did you take inspiration from things like that, from stories that you grew up with? To kind of write your own thing.
I did.
With your own spin.
I honestly did. Well, I took inspiration, like not like plagiaristic inspiration, but more like tonal inspiration, right? One of my favorite storytellers of all time is Chris Claremont, right? And what he was able to do for, it feels like decades, which is trippy, but it really wasn't. I think his run in total was maybe like 15 or 17 years. But for some reason,
you're right. You're good. Just 17. Yep.
Yeah, but for some reason, it felt like he was doing X-Men for like 30 or 40 years, right?
Because we were kids when they were coming out, so it felt like an eternity between months, right?
So, and I had the chance to many times meet Chris Claremont, and even recently last fall, not only like meet him, kind of like, hey, I'm so and so kind of thing, but actually, I'm walking to my table at Artist Alley. And, I do a quick, I want to give him some dap. I just want to give him a shout out. And I say, Chris, always been an inspiration. I love what you're doing. I love what you've done. And I'm very grateful for your presence in this industry and what you've always stood for and how you've created so much that many of us can connect to. And I was going to keep going. He goes, but wait. Who are you? Tell me about yourself. And I was like, what? And then he just literally called me over. We hung out for a good 45 minutes talking before the event started, exchanged phone numbers and everything. And it's one thing to, people always say never meet your heroes. In this context, I'm so glad that I did, because he affirmed a lot of this kind of like thinking about tonal perspectives, about purpose, about intent in writing, about never compromising the integrity of character development or story development or plot, right? And I drew a lot of reference from it because he brilliantly humanized so many characters over those 17 years, right? And in a way that obviously a precedent was set before by many other writers, obviously Stan Lee being one of the first, right? But the reality is, like, Chris did an incredible deep dive into psyche, an incredible deep dive into development of characters. And when I was writing La Borinqueña, that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to explore these characters versus explore their battles, right? For me, it was more important to discuss the internal conflict the character was having versus the external conflict that they were going to have with a supervillain. There was my second graphic novel that the late George Perez actually drew the cover, and that was actually his last published original cover that he illustrated prior to retiring, right? And that book for me took a different path when I was lettering it, because as a graphic designer, I'm a self-taught letterer, but I write the scripts, and when I see the art, I tend to kind of pull back on a lot of my writing so that the art could kind of like speak more, or sometimes I do a deeper dive if there's enough negative space. And I found that the conversation that for me was important that a fictional character should have is, am I losing myself in this new identity that I am? Is this, I've always known me, this person that wears this t-shirt and this hat, but when I put on this cape, is that still me? Is that my id? Is that a whole other version of me that I've never known before? Am I becoming this other person? Am I losing my original self, right? And that kind of like existential internal conflict for me was so important because it made the characters universal. It went beyond the idea of superpowers. And then in writing that, I thought that hopefully this spoke to, well, so many intersectional audiences, right? Meaning, like, I'm thinking right now, the immigrant experience, right? Or the, let's make it simpler, the student family experience. When I'm in school, I'm this person. When I'm at home, I'm this other person. When I'm at work, I'm this person. When I'm with my girlfriend, I'm that person. When I'm with my homies, I'm this person. When I'm actually, like, working at my internship, I'm this person. And we kind of, as humans, navigate this duality, whether it's through something as simple as social linguistic approach to code switching, or something more complex that we literally turn on a persona. Like, some people can literally say that about hip hop artists, right? That they literally become this persona. And some people can say, Tupac's biggest enemy was Tupac, because he was in battle with this persona they created versus this real artist that was behind the microphone that many people didn't always see. And he had to live up to the hype of this persona. So in writing for La Borinqueña, inspired by the work that Chris did over all these characters and the humanization that he did of these characters. One of my favorite characters early in Uncanny X-Men was Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler. And this kind of, like, in devout Catholic that was literally a demon based on these mythologies that, the very same Catholic Church was teaching. And this kind of, like, conflict that this character had, because even though he knew he was ostracized and was treated as a practical pariah, that never compromised his spirituality. He never thought to himself, forget this, and that approach to character development, that approach and necessity to humanize characters, for me, was very critical in creating this universe. I didn't want to create a storyline, and my storyline has been around now for 7 years, that really centered around the supervillain, that really centered around how strong is that punch going to be that's going to push somebody through that wall, or do they even go through that wall, or is there even a punch? I remember when I was first working on the first book, there was so much buzz on social media because, Omar, there's never been a precedent for how I introduced this project, because particularly as an independent, but I don't think even in mainstream comics, the fact that I announced that I'm making a project at a press conference for one of the biggest cultural events in New York City, the Puerto Rican Day Parade, in May of 2016, and then between May of 2016 and December 2016, there is no book. The book actually is in the hands of people by December of 2016. And in the span of those months, I'm touring, I'm visiting universities, I'm visiting museums, I'm being interviewed by New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, BuzzFeed, ABC, Fox, all of these media outlets talking to me. And I just have like 3 pages of a comic book and this kind of universe that's kind of like percolating in my brain. But the story for me from the beginning was always, how is this character going to grow? How is this character's universe going to be more important than the supervillains? Growing up reading like Batman and hearing about Batman, they say kind of like the rule of comic book storytelling is that a hero is defined by their rogues gallery, right? In creating La Borinqueña, I wanted her definition to be defined by who she was. We are not, when I mean we as brown folk don't have stories that are mainstream here in the US. For some particular reason, studios, publishing houses always feel that the story that speaks to the US Hispanic audience has to be an international person, has to be in Spanish, right? As if there are no 3 or 5th generation like Chicanos in East LA, or 4th generation Puerto Ricans in the South Bronx, right? Or as if there aren't any Latins in the U.S. who don't even speak Spanish, right? And
I was gonna say, most of the cats I hang around with, man, here in Kentucky that are 3rd generation Latinos, none of them speak Spanish,
right?
None of them speak Spanish. My buddies, the Omnibus, only one. There's 6 of us. 5 of us are Latino. Only one of them speaks Spanish besides me. like, because they all grew up in America, and a lot of them are kids of immigrants, and
Right.
that's what happens. But you're right, I see that everywhere. Like, funny enough, you brought that up. I just saw the Transformers movie 2 nights ago,
Oh, no
and we
spoilers.
have our first Peruvian Transformer. I was like, yeah, man, Peru
Oh,
represent.
Joe. Peru.
I'm not gonna say anything. But how? Okay, give me the pitch for people that don't know what this book is about. Give me the pitch.
I think, first of all, I have to open by saying that if you've never heard of La Borinqueña, that's totally cool, because this is literally the best time to jump into it. That's like me telling you about a new TV show 3 seasons in, and you're like, how come I've never heard of this show? And I'm like, bro, you're straight. Just watch these, just binge this for the next weekend. You're gonna come out of that cave like a new person, because you're gonna find this whole new universe and find characters. So La Borinqueña is Marisol Rios de la Luz. She's an undergraduate student who lives in Brooklyn, New York. When she goes to Puerto Rico, to kind of continue her studies as not an international student, but kind of like a visiting student, right? She's still matriculated in her school in New York City, but she's going to take a semester abroad. But the reality is, when you're speaking from this kind of like immigrant, or as Puerto Rican's migrant experience, the real reason why she's going to Puerto Rico is because her grandparents are retired, but they're not really retired because they're trying to run a cafe. So she's really going to Puerto Rico to check on her grandparents. Meanwhile, she's also working on her undergraduate degree. Upon discovering these caves, she actually finds ancient artifacts that, when she washes off the back guano, form a star, literally crystals that come together to form a star. The connection with her to caves has to do with the fact that she's an environmental sciences student. The connection with her to do an independent study has to do with the reality that there has been over $100 million cut out of the University of Puerto Rico. This is actually real. And as a visiting student, she's not a priority. The priority is given to students who are from the island, paying for tuition. So she has to kind of like find a way to make things happen. But upon finding these crystals, she puts them together. It opens a portal and connects her to the deities of Puerto Rico, the Taínos, or the indigenous peoples of the Greater Antilles. When she connects to these deities, these semis, they imbue upon her superhuman abilities that come from the elements, the ability to control and manipulate the weather. That's how she can fly. She can manipulate water and the earth. Her superhuman strength comes from the seas and the mountains. Her costume literally is born out of a little ribbon that her mother gave her that was kind of like this family heirloom that passed on from generation to generation and magically transformed into her costume. So she's a superhero with superhuman abilities, but she's in the real place that is Puerto Rico, and is hit with this reality that she's kind of like, these memes that circulated for years where people like jokingly refer to things that they have beef with as like first world problems. She's literally a first world girl going into not so much a third world, but a colony, and faced with this reality. And what may find itself to be tropes typically in a lot of sci-fi and superhero stories of the evil corporation or the government corruption or characters that are spawned out of evil experimentation. The reality is that that's an actual part of Puerto Rico's history. So I've been able to kind of like dabble with a lot of historical fiction, and I kind of call my style of writing historical speculative fiction, right? Where I kind of like
borrowing elements from mythology,
elements from mythology, from history, and then, kind of like make it into a sancocho that literally is kind of like what superhero stories are all about. Because Superman is just Moses, right? I mean, Thor is literally Thor. Right. And all of these characters are really coming from a lot of European mythologies. Or you have a character like Black Panther that they created an entire nation in mythology around. But obviously there are influences there.
Oh, yeah. Mignola does the same thing through Hellboy. Like, that's what I love about the world building and things like that, is where he's borrowing a lot of mythologies from everywhere, not just like one location. But the beauty of this world that we live in is that everywhere you go has their own myths, their own legends, their own things, and it's really cool. You said sancocho. Made me laugh. So everywhere you go has their own cool myths and legends that you can
and
borrow
everywhere you go
from.
has their own
And
sancocho
it has,
recipe. That's the other thing.
It ain't even been tapped, so that's what makes it really cool that you're doing that.
Exactly. It hasn't really been tapped, but man, you're talking about like millions of people that see themselves in this and that giggle if I say the word sancocho, right? And I often the feedback that I get from a lot of folks, particularly like brown folks, right, is they'll ask, so who is she inspired by? Like, who in your family is Marisol, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find that trippy because we're so used to not seeing ourselves that we approach stories that look like us incredulously, right? We just don't believe it. I was like, come on, man. Homie must have actually found that like some cousin of his, and he just literally like took her entire like profile and made her into this character. And it's like, no, she's straight up fictional. I remember some years ago I was traveling with Juno Diaz, doing a lot of talks when he was doing the promotional tour for The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And people in the audience, mostly like brown folks, will ask him, listen, I've been looking everywhere for all of these books that Oscar has been writing. Where can I find the books? And he's like, Oscar's fictional. There are no books. There's a character in the book who wrote books, but those books don't exist because the character doesn't exist. And somebody was like, yeah, I've been doing all this research about the Fuku. I can't find anywhere that mentions the Fuku. And he's like, I made that up. It doesn't exist, right? And so it's kind of like, and when we grow up as people of color in the US, we are taught, whether it's on our English classes or college, right? Or when we sit in front of a TV or any device or crack open a book, that these characters speak to us on a universal level. That these characters, even if they look nothing like us, speak to us at the core of being human. And we see it. We see it. Yeah, I see myself in Steve Rogers, or I see myself in Clark Kent. But we literally don't see ourselves in these characters. And we're kind of like, it's kind of flipped on us to think that if characters look like us, then they only can speak to us and they can't speak to anybody else. And that is ridiculous because
I see what you mean.
We have the potential to have universal stories too. I mean, La Borinqueña comes from an idea that is spawned from the mythologies of the original people, the Taínos of the Caribbean islands, right, of Puerto Rico. But the reality is the majority of the readers of La Borinqueña aren't Puerto Rican. We do work with the Penn Faulkner Foundation in Washington, D.C., who purchase our books and distribute them to public schools throughout the city area that are teaching children about Puerto Rico. And when I visit these classrooms, there are no Puerto Ricans in the classroom. There is a mix of South Americans, African Americans, South Asians, white, no Puerto Ricans. And the children, being children, they just see a character and they just get into it. And my sons are biracial, Korean, Puerto Rican. My youngest son loves Black Panther, has a Black Panther outfit. He sees the universality in this character that's of African descent. So I think the work that we try to do with our character is really like, I try to do my best to write a good story, first of all, you know what I mean, that connects to kind of like this love of storytelling that I've always grown up with comics, right? But man, there's a part of me that also understands that our stories don't exist. Our stories aren't out there, and the fact that I had this opportunity to do a how do I say it, a crowdfunding project with Zoop, is incredibly, for me, scary, because I was like, is there going to be an audience that really wants to kind of like invest in this, in this project? And dude, we funded this in like 4 days.
I saw that. So big congratulations to you and the team that has put this together. It makes me happy because being a hardcover and putting yourself out there on a crowdfunding website is really difficult to do these days. But as I get to interview a lot of people, and I love giving the spotlight to people that come and pitch their book on my channel, and giving my viewers a chance to check out if this is for them or not. Holy crap, man. Like the amount of work you all have to do, and then the stress level of like, oh man, we're almost there, but we're not there yet. You know, like, so a big congratulations to you for meeting it within 4 days. I think it's wonderful. It definitely shows, you know, how much word is getting out there about the book and the project. And I think it's wonderful what you all have done too about the donating. You know, 200. You said $200,000. Is that right?
Yep, 200,000.
Man, that's huge. I give books away, but donating $200,000, that's wonderful, man. That's wonderful. So that's huge. That's huge. I gotta answer this from my buddy William Lee. If you take away Miles Morales, who's the most popular Hispanic comic book character? Take away Miles Morales. We can't use him.
La Borinqueña.
There we go.
There you go. Like Miles is the juggernaut that he is now, because studios put money into it. You know what I mean? The best thing that happened to Miles was Sony. Not so much Peter, but definitely Miles.
That
right?
Game, Sony,
because the video games, the films, you know, and obviously the other thing that happened to Miles that's amazing is Phil Lord, this Cubano, and his partner Chris. They've come up with incredible stories, you know, and but you know, I mean, like I have to like toot my own horn with this project, because what a lot of people may not recognize, or me, is that I've been able to get this project in front of mainstream media outlets, right? And that's so important, because part of this conversation, I was telling you that, you know, studios and publishers relegate us to the Spanish language shelf, or the Spanish channel, or the boutique HBO Latino kind of like label, right? Mm-hmm. But the reality is that our stories, our experience have been a part of this country for centuries, and even beyond that, depending on our heritage, right? And so, like, for me to get this reviewed by the Washington Post, or to have a video produced by BuzzFeed, or to be interviewed yesterday by ABC News, this is the kind of stuff that, this is part of the work. It isn't just like calling up your tío and your tía, like, hey, donate to my crowdfunding. It's how to get this in front of the right audience, right? Because unfortunately, it's part of our conditioning as people of color that we don't value ourselves unless we're valued by others. It's kind of crazy, but it's the truth. You know what I'm saying? It's like if I'm on the shelf at Target, mira, you got there, you made it. You know what I mean? But will people actually support if I'm at the Latino Expo alongside all these other Latino artists? You see what I'm saying? So it's like we have to kind of like find so many different places to get our work out there. Because yes, we have to be in the Latin community to get our stuff out there. But yes, we also have to be in this mainstream space, because our stories need to go to others so that they can learn about us, so they can learn about our experiences, and so that they can see us as heroes. And that's, I think, the most important thing. We can see ourselves, and may have always seen ourselves as heroes, but it's important that others see ourselves as heroes as well.
What where can people?
And yes, I am a New Yorker.
I was gonna read this. Hermano, I love seeing some Latino love and support on the channel. I assume Edgardo is a New Yorker. Oh my God, don't get him. Omar Reyes started. Yo, we get some Latinos in the chat now. I forgot my buddy Havoc and Trigonosis. Now I'm in the mood for some pasteles.
There you go. No ketchup. Hot sauce only, though.
No. Yes. Sopa de mondongo is the hangover cure. Back in the day, I was visiting some family and we partied too hard. Next day, we hit up the food. That's what my dad would say too. The sopa de mondongo food cart, and got a bowl of mondongo. Headache magically disappeared.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's a scene in the first book where she's kind of like does a heroic feat, and instead of receiving kind of like the key to the city, this woman comes out with a big pot of like sancocho. Or when she finally meets up with like her family, the first thing they do when they bring her home is like serve her up some pasteles. Like, food is such an important part of our identity and heritage, you know. But we don't want to have like a Taco Tuesday themed comic book, you know, series either.
You don't want to have a cover of
we're not gonna deny that's an important part, but it's not gonna be the central part of our experience and of our narratives, you know.
Now you got some Brooklyn love. This is a really good question from my buddy James. Is there a way to read La Borinqueña #1 online, or is the series print only?
Nope. I am so old school. I want you to literally hold the book in your hand. And I'm also very small. I'm a very small studio. And, you know, we've printed maybe like 20,000 copies of our first issue, 50,000 of our team up book with DC Comics, right?
Yeah. Can you hold that? Can you hold that up again, if you don't mind?
Boop, boop.
That was the Wonder Woman one, right? Yeah.
Yep. And on the back cover, it's Superman.
Gotcha. Nice.
So these projects, we always do like small runs. And I say small compared to the big two. I mean, the big two is printing in the hundreds of thousands of units. But the reality is, for those who don't know behind the scenes what happens in comics, particularly now that they're owned by corporations like Warner and Disney, right, is that comics are magazines. By the time that comic book is on the shelf that Wednesday, they've already made their money from the ads. And they're magazines because they're coming out every week or every month, right? I don't have that infrastructure set up for my business model. There's no advertising in my books. Therefore, if I were to go digital, I'm putting myself at a very high risk of being bootlegged. And if I'm bootlegged, there goes my business model, because then I won't actually be able to take the book physically to events. So that's one of the main reasons. And also, you know, I created this business model where I literally bring the products to the consumers. It's a direct consumer model, right? You know, you when you're ordering books, you're ordering them directly from me. I literally have a stack of books behind this banner that have to go to the post office. Well, not today because they just closed, but tomorrow, right? And I also, because I'm old school, I love like how you have, that's not a virtual background. You know, I love having books on shelves. I love being able to pull something off the shelf and reference it or reminisce over it. And I love that you have the Uncanny X-Men #137. That was like the most coveted book when I was growing up.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like in my 20s when I finally got myself not even a good copy, not near mint, a good quality copy. You know what I mean?
This is my original copy I've had. Oh my gosh.
And I got Chris to sign mine too.
Yeah, this one's signed by Byrne and Chris.
Oh, dope.
Oh, dude, this is My hope was always to get Terry Austin and then Stan Lee to sign it, but I only got 2 books signed by Stan Lee, and I never have met Terry Austin, but he's like my favorite inker of all time.
He's amazing. Yeah, I've had great conversations with him over the phone on other projects, and I've met Stan Lee a few times. Made him laugh, made me laugh. Really, really, really sweet person. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, it's one of these things that I had only met him. I met him once in the 90s when he was Stan, right? Older, but damn, he could carry a conversation and talk to you. And then I met him later on, probably 2008, 9. He was still Stan, but he was a lot older and just not the same. Like it wasn't like carrying a conversation like we did like in the 90s. But yeah, man, he did a lot for the industry and opened up a lot of doors for people and opened up a lot of stories and potential for people. So I think he was definitely one of my favorite meets at comic conventions. At the first time I didn't have to wait that long. 2008 was a different story. That was no. It was after the movies, so it must have been 2010, 2011.
Yeah, that's when they had they call it the rope set up to get to his.
Oh
table.
My gosh, it was insane.
And people showed up with stacks, and they were charging like 50 or a couple of hundred for each signature.
Yeah, and then they were like, we're cutting it off at 3. Stan can only sign 3. It was nuts, man.
It was bonkers. Yeah, no, that was bonkers. You know.
Who are your biggest influence? Yeah,
my biggest influence on my work. I mentioned Chris Claremont. As a writer, as a philanthropist, George Perez, may he rest in peace. Many people may not know unless you actually were at events or followed George on social media that he dedicated a lot of his time and money to charity. I mean, he's personally shared with me that he would never have to work, nor his grandchildren would ever have to work again, because he had such a great deal with DC Comics regarding royalties. And that's one of the main reasons why he offered to do the cover of La Borinqueña for free. Let me pull that up over here, because
people, my buddy Josh was asking if you've got any artwork to show off.
Well, this is one of my favorite covers right here. This is a variant cover by Carlos Pacheco, rest in peace.
Jeez, we lost him too. Yeah.
This is an homage to the Action Comics, obviously, first appearance of Superman, but it's also an homage to his very own Superman cover.
The Camelot Falls cover.
Yes. So another whatchamacallit, goodness, where is, you know what? I got him literally right here. So this is the George Perez cover that he did. And there's a really great story to this, because George's first trip to Puerto Rico ever as a professional was brokered by me. And to show his gratitude, while we were in Puerto Rico, we were hanging out over breakfast one morning. He offered to illustrate this cover for me. And upon illustrating it, he told me, you can do whatever you want with the original artwork. It's yours. You can do whatever you want in terms of merchandising. It's 100% yours. And then he also shared that, you know, his only regret was that he never created a character that was his own, that was Latin. Like, he knew that he co-created White Tiger with Edgardo, and, you know, between DC and Marvel created close to like 70 characters, but he really kind of made it very clear how important it was that La Borinqueña existed, because it was a character created by a Puerto Rican for Puerto Ricans, about Puerto Rican culture. And then he jokingly shared that, you know, when he was drawing Wonder Woman, he literally was visualizing her as a Puerto Rican. That's why her hair was curly.
Yep, I know that story. Yeah, man.
When he created Starfire, he was thinking about Edie Chacon, who was this kind of like cabaret TV variety show star of the 70s and 80s. I mean, literally, you could Google Iris Chacon, and you'll see the similarities, like uncanny, of her and Starfire. So my influences, yeah, definitely like George Perez, Chris Claremont. My favorite visual artist growing up, John Romita Jr. And beyond comics, you know, I'm inspired by Ruben Blades, who is a personal friend. Talk about meeting your heroes. I've met him many times, and learned many years ago that he's a huge comic book collector, an original art collector. And I shared with him, he had no knowledge that Alejandro de Chavez Schomburg, aka Alex Schomburg, was this incredibly prolific sci-fi cover artist. But I mean, literally, like, he created a character that would inspire Bender in Futurama, right?
Futurama, yeah, man.
But he also illustrated covers for Captain America when it was still timely. And Alex Schomburg, aka Alejandro de Chavez Schomburg, was from Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. And Ruben Blades had no idea that Alex Schomburg was actually a Puerto Rican, and that Ruben actually owned original Alex Schomburg paintings. And even recently, like on social media, we did on Instagram, we did a collaborative post, and he's using his platform to promote our crowdfunding campaign. And so, yeah, I get inspiration from a lot. Another person that inspires me is Rosario Dawson, how she uses her
I see that in the background.
Yeah, how she uses her platform. Yeah, there she goes right there. How she uses her platform to really kind of like boost messages, and really is someone, and I can speak personally about that is truly passionate. This is not a vanity thing for her. This is not just something that's on a bulleted list that her publicist is telling to speak on. This is some stuff that she's always committed to. I mean, ever since she was a child, she would literally hand paint signs and march down the streets of her neighborhood in the Lower East Side of Manhattan because she wanted trees in their neighborhood. So this is someone who's always been using her platform for good. And so I've been very fortunate that I've found inspiration from a lot of artists that are now part of my my community, and I you know, beautifully refer to many of them as my allies.
I think it's wonderful that you have also worked with a lot of people in the story with George Perez, man. That really hit me because you mentioned this a little bit earlier, being Latino and like looking at names and not seeing a lot of names out there that look like yours. But I remember Perez being the one that I was like, dude, we got a Latino working in the freaking comic books. Because I never paid attention to names until I got about 10, 11 years old. Then I started seeing artists. And I'm like, oh, that artist is really good. Oh, John Burns Women. Wow. And then George Perez was, and I saw his name. And I was like, oh, dude, that's so cool. Because, back then we didn't have the internet. We didn't even have Wizard magazine that would show you pictures of what these artists look like. So these were just like,
I mean, back then, how did we pronounce? We said Bill Sinkiewicz.
Sinkiewicz, yeah, man. And to this day, I still mispronounce.
And then Bill Sienkiewicz is actually like one of my dear friends. He's done so much work for us, and
that's awesome.
Spanish, which is also trippy. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
So we got a couple more questions here, and I did want to show off some of your artwork really quick. I'm sorry, some of the internal artwork here from the book. So this is some of the internal artwork, and who's the internal artist?
So we have a roster of talent. Right now we're looking at Emilio Lopez. Emilio Lopez has been with Marvel, DC, and Nickelodeon. And this is actually his splash page. It was colored by Juan Fernandez, who does everything from Image to Star Wars to Hasbro to Marvel to DC. And a lot of what we had to do with the first issue was like do a lot of pivoting depending on artist availability. Because when you work in the independent scene, particularly when you're working with like professional artists, you really have to work around their schedule. And the reality is that if Marvel literally comes knocking on their door, they're gonna be like, "I'm sorry, I got to do this Spider-Man gig," and it goes with the it just goes with it, and you have to go with it, So I never turn bitter or angry about it. I'm like, it's cool, and I just pivot and find another creative team. But the one illustrator that's been consistent on all of our books is Will Rosado.
Will Rosado, okay,
fellow Brooklynite as well.
So this is from the very first volume. So I'm just showing off some of this internal artwork here.
This is Will Rosado's art right here. Yeah.
So this is the main gentleman that's working on the book. That consistency as far as art. Okay.
So Will has a background with everything from Marvel, DC to IDWs, drawn titles like Avengers, Detective Comics, Nightwing, Supergirl, G.I. Joe. He has a new book that's coming out actually right now. That is actually I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a documentary in a way, but it's kind of a fictional take on what happened on January 6th in terms of like the riots and stuff.
Okay.
See, and he illustrated that. So I'm actually really excited about reading and looking at his art when that one's officially out. I think it's out now. It's called 1/6.
Gotcha. You hitting up New York Comic Con this year and selling your hardcover there. Would it be actually, before you answer that, tell me a little bit about this crowdfund from Zoop, like what you're going to get, what's available, and then when the book will be printed.
So the Zoop crowdfund launched 4 days ago. We fully funded it. By yesterday it was completely fully funded, and we actually surpassed the goal right now. Right now, what is established itself as a guaranteed publication. Obviously, before it reaches its goal, it's all like, in this maybe world, right? Now that we're fully funded, it's definitely happening. We're looking at a release for the holidays, not for New York Comic Con. And what we're also looking at is a very select audience, because it's literally like, if you get on this right now, you are guaranteed this book. There is no guarantee that there's going to be books. I mean, reality is these are giant books. So I can carry a small long box, with about 80 graphic novels. These books, I'm going to end up carrying like 10 or 20 of them because they're going to be so giant. So the best way to get them is literally right now, because this crowdfunding campaign is kind of like, because of the success, has now positioned itself into a pre-order. And it's not really even a campaign anymore. Now it's just literally like pre-order the book. It's hardcover, oversized. Typically, a comic book is about 6 by 10 inches. This is going to be 12 by 8 inches. And it's going to collect the first 4 graphic novels, short stories, and an incredible collection of pinups from an incredible list of artists.
Wow. Okay. And since it's already been crowdfunded, the orders that are going in right now are just basically pre-orders.
Yeah.
Will this be available? Will this be available? I always ask this question because I'm always asked this question later on. Will this be available later on for retailers to be able to order copies, or can retailers order copies through pre-order?
That's it. So one of the things that we set up with Zoop is literally the retail bundle. So retailers are actually buying the books now. Like our local comic shop here in New York City, Forbidden Planet, they just confirmed this morning that they ordered a retail bundle. So stores are literally buying their bundle so that they will have it in stock when the book is actually available. So in this case, if you, there's 2 things you can do, right? You can literally support it yourself, pre-order the book, and it'll go straight to you. Or if you're really loyal to your local comic book shop, hit them up, tell them about the campaign, tell them to order the retail bundle. They can get 3 books at the wholesale price, and you can get one of those 3 books, or you bring 2 of the other homies, and then the other 2 get those books. But it's also an opportunity to help us promote the campaign, because really, like, what makes this project successful is the fact that many people are championing it for us, right? So if I support it, I'm going to tell my friends that they should support it, or I'm going to hit up my local comic book shop because I want them to support it as well.
I like that. I like that. Okay, so then we got some logistics here. Now we got some. Will there be a variant cover for this collection?
We were thinking about doing a variant cover, but it's just kind of like there's a lot of logistics involved in that because of the production of printing hardcover editions. You have to have a certain amount of orders made, right? And it's kind of tough to promise. And I was going to do a variant cover. So we were going to do, Jorge Molina was going to do the variant cover. But then I was like, we're going to need to like literally sell the same amount of books to have an order for variants in terms of the production. Because you can't just go to a print shop and be like, I need 3 books made with this cover. They're going to like, that's like next. That's just not, from a production standpoint, that's just not how it's going to work. So unfortunately, we're gonna go that route. And I wanted originally a slipcase, but from a production value, those are ridiculously overpriced. Yeah,
that was the next question.
No slipcase. They're too expensive. We're doing a very small run. If you see the campaign goal originally was 15. I think we're upwards of like 16,000 now with our goal. The idea was we wanted to keep the campaign realistically small. And I wasn't going to try to crowdfund $150,000, right? Because if you're a big publisher, then yeah, you're going to probably spend 6 figures on printing, 10,000 or more books. But the reality is, this is the way with the model that Zoop has created is really created a kind of like a boutique model for ardent collectors, right? So if you're in this group and you make this pledge and you make your pre-order, you're literally going to be part of this little elite group that actually has this hardcover edition. Beyond that, we have the paperback editions of the graphic novels that are still going to be selling. And they're still also part of the add-ons on our campaign as well, the variant covers that we have for those.
Okay, so this book, just to kind of give people some specs, this book has 310 pages, and it collects all 4 of the graphic novels. So it's a big book.
It's pretty big.
It's got the 6 short stories and then 48 pages of covers and pinups done by other folks, right? Like like what you just showed with the George Perez and the
and the covers are going to be there like inside the book without treatment. So they're going to be like version art. The Carlos Pacheco cover is one of the pinups. We have pinups by Bill Sienkiewicz in the book as well. And actually, we're going to be announcing in the next week, because the campaign is literally up for 25 more days. I'm happy, but we have like more announcements. And so we have some artists that are actually going to be creating original art that they're donating to this campaign. So that's going to be another opportunity for people to purchase or bid on, depending on the model in terms of like the response. And it's exciting because when you get to do these kind of like donated pieces of art, you don't have to kind of like abide by certain copyright guidelines because this is technically a one-off. So it could be Kenya with somebody, for example, because it's just an original piece of art versus something that's mass produced.
Do you have a trailer for the book?
Do I have a trailer? Actually, I don't. I didn't have a budget to make a trailer.
All right, this was asked a little bit earlier, but who would you get to play your dream? Who would play your lead?
It would honestly, I mean, there've been a lot of young actors that have showed a lot of passion for this, like this young actor named Madison Reyes, who had a TV show on Netflix called Julie and the Phantoms. There's been some talks that Ariana DeBose would be a dope Borinqueña or Laurie Hernandez. But reality is that, you know, I'm making comics. I don't make. I
like that. That's a good, dude. That's a good answer. That's a good answer.
You know, and I mean, I use photo references when we do these characters, but you know, when you know comics well, you know that every artist lends their own interpretation to how these characters look. And you know, if you put like John Burns, Jean Grey next to John Romita's Jean Grey, they look like two completely different women, even though the costumes are exactly the same. So the DC collaboration, I mean, I'll answer that. That collaboration came about within less than 2 weeks after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. I show up to the New York Comic Con. I am very distraught because I had not heard from my own family in that time. Didn't want to be at the New York Comic Con. I pushed through hundreds of people to get to my table, which I found to be odd because Artist Alley is never that busy on a Friday morning. Usually the main floor. And when I finally make it to my table, I realized when there's a volunteer from the New York Comic Con there that was actually a crowd waiting for me. And so I had to set up my table really fast. And when I looked into the crowd, one of the people that was there waiting, and he waited for almost up to an hour to see me, was Dan DiDio, who was the former co-publisher of DC Comics. And Dan DiDio comes up to my table within the hour wearing his World Baseball League Puerto Rico team hat with his wife, who's also from Puerto Rico. So I thought to myself, boom, that's his connection to Puerto Rico. And he's looking through my book, which at the time was just my first book. I didn't have any other books yet. And commenting on the production value, the art, the print quality, kind of like, wow, surprised that I did this whole thing by myself. And I just go right for the jugular. And I said, what are we going to do for Puerto Rico? And that conversation turned into the blueprint for this crossover anthology. My idea was I'm bringing the entire DC universe to Puerto Rico to team up in a series of short stories with La Borinqueña. And so I literally had access to the entire toy box. And I'm at New York Comic Con and I worked the floor. Immediately behind me was Greg Pak, who I was already acquainted with. Greg's like, boom, count me in for a Superman story. I walk down the row and I go up to Tony Daniel, who's also Puerto Rican, and he was like, boom, I'm doing the cover. And Bill Sienkiewicz comes to the table, and Dennis Cowan and Reggie Hudlin, and all of a sudden I start all of these big tier talented writers and illustrators all come on board. By the time we go to print, we have 200 writers, artists that come together and do this project for free. And it won me Eisner's Humanitarian Award. It started kind of like this movement towards our philanthropic work. We raised close to $150 off just that first book. And instead of donating that book, our proceeds into a larger corporate nonprofit, my partner and wife, Kyun, came up with the idea of creating a fund. Let's create a fund that we can dip into periodically and award micro grants to small nonprofits throughout Puerto Rico. And that's what we did over the course of the years. And then future collaborations like the one we did with Rosario Dawson and NRDC kind of like also went into that fund. And that ends up being close to now what is $200,000 that we've used to award micro grants. And it was an incredible experience managing such an incredible pool of talent in such a short amount of time, working with so many characters. And also the crazy thing was what was left on the table. Wonder Woman was left on the table. Batman was left on the table. And I thought to myself, I'm writing a Batman story. I'm writing a Wonder Woman story. And one of the things that Dan DiDio taught me about canon and copyright, he was like, listen, man, you can mention other people's characters, you just can't show them. So then that just translated that entire crossover book is canon to La Borinqueña. So in other books, we reference Batman. In other books, we reference Wonder Woman. We'll never show them again, but we reference them because they did come to Puerto Rico and they actually did do some work with her.
I love hearing that story. Because, I mean, when we think of, sometimes when people think of publishers, they immediately detach themselves from people. They're like, oh, it's DC Comics or it's Marvel Comics. But there are people that actually help out, individuals. So I think it's really cool that it was Kismet that Dan Didio just happened to be there and was like,
but I want to say,
you just straight up asked him.
Yeah, cool. I want to say though, the reality is that it yes, and to add to that, it makes a difference who's on the other side of that conversation, who's on the other side of that table, right? Because if from the beginning someone on that other side doesn't inherently and automatically and from the beginning have an invested value or an understanding, dude, you could have the best elevator pitch on planet. No one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares. They're just gonna move on to the next thing. And that is the reality for every reconstruction that we've produced. Goodness, there's so many projects that we've never talked publicly about that have never happened. And even after reconstruction, we've never been able to team up again with DC because the guard has changed. There's been an incredible turnover over the last what is it now? 6 years since we produced that project. Different publishers, different presidents. I mean, look at the whole Taco Tuesday fiasco that happened last year during Hispanic Heritage Month, right? and so we are grateful for those allies like Dan Didio who are there at the right time. It is Kismet, but it's also about that perfect kind of intersection of people, just happen to come across each other at that point. If something would have changed that afternoon and he would have decided to just go someplace else, that conversation and project would have possibly never happened. And I think that's also a lot of the work that we do. Even with Rosario, I met Rosario in 2016 at the Puerto Rican Day Parade because her float was on the same staging street as my float, and we were just there for hours waiting for our float to kind of be allowed access to enter onto Fifth Avenue so it can be part of the procession for the parade. And we had this exchange. It was a very quick, very brief exchange, and that planted the seed because when I connect to all these other artists like Gus Vasquez, for example, he shares with me that he's her uncle. And because of Gus, we were able to reconnect. And when we started working on reconstruction, Gus was going to work on a project, and Rosario reaches out to Gus, and Gus connects her to me, and eventually she just starts calling me directly, and that was the beginning of our friendship. So it's all about kind of the right time and the right place and the right people, and those people that have the value. And honestly, everywhere we've gone with this work, it's really a testament to the allies that we've been able to have. And I think even with this campaign, Zoop, Eric, and Jordan, they're incredible visionaries for this space of independent storytellers and artists, right? Because we don't have always the infrastructure to do order fulfillment, production schedules. Even setting up rewards. They with me, even with all my experience doing my stuff for the last 7 years, they still gave me some grounding. They were like, let's ground this, let's pull this down, let's pull this out, let's bring it down to here, because they want a successful campaign. Mm-hmm. They don't want this campaign to fail. And obviously they're a business and they want it to succeed, but they also believe in the work. And one of the cool things that they did when we negotiated this project with them is they on their own said, we're going to donate a portion of our commission back to your charity work. And that's phenomenal. So they see the value. They see the value in our work. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have this campaign going on right now.
Well, it really does show how far you've come to see the campaign be this successful too, to have people that have faith in it. And so I have to ask these questions too. The book itself, once it gets funded, how far into the year or maybe next year, because I don't know how far behind printers are, but when do you expect to have a physical copy and then physical copies send out to people that have supported the campaign?
So we're gonna go into production immediately after the campaign wraps on the 7th of July,
Okay.
with an expected in your hand date of possibly early to mid December, which is
Oh, wow.
also like
Okay.
incredible, because oftentimes when you have crowdfunding campaigns, it's this speculative project. I'm going to make a graphic novel. Give me this money so I can make this graphic novel, right? And then, people start making a graphic novel and they tell all their followers, by the way, I haven't finished it yet. With this project, all the books already exist. And some transparency, since I'm a graphic designer and I produce graphic novels, the book has already been packaged. The whole book has been packaged already, literally. The only thing I'm waiting on right now is a foreword. And once the foreword is in, I design it, and then I do the final layout of the table of contents. And if we get any additional pinups, then we just add them as bonus material as well. Although there is one bonus artist that I'm excited about, which is my 7-year-old son, because he actually created this character, Otto. This is actually our first spin-off character. And this project is actually not going to be included in the hardcover, because this is actually part of our second volume, or rather our second arc that we're starting to develop now. But my youngest son actually created this character, so his original sketch is actually going to be included in that hardcover edition that we're going to be publishing. So yeah, I think it's a very short. I mean, for those that know production, I think it's a pretty small window to literally wrap a campaign by early.
That's why I was surprised you said this year and not next year, because
it's this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dude, I just want to thank you so much for your time, for talking to us about this project, the book, and all the work that you're doing for the whole, not just the comics community, man, the humanity itself. I think it's wonderful, man.
Thank you, man.
So I encourage people to go and check out the Zoop campaign that is going on right now until July 7th. And there's different tiers there that you can go and check out and see if the book is for you, and hopefully tell your retailers if they are interested in ordering more than 3 copies. So that would be cool.
Word.
Any word of encouragement that you have for people that are trying to make it into comics or trying to write their own stories?
Start writing already. You know what I mean? You shouldn't wait for an assignment. You shouldn't wait for a budget. You should already be writing. You should already be drawing. You should already be developing your Bible. You should already be designing original characters. The solid piece of advice is, once you really feel 100% about your manuscript, 100% about your characters, get them copywritten. And literally just go to the copyright website. Don't hire a lawyer. Don't hire any of that stuff. That's all bogus. It's so unnecessary. I've copywritten and trademarked all of my own IPs myself. And I was even approached by the Library of Congress because they want me to start doing workshops about it, because it's so easy to do. So yeah, man, that's what it is. Just start it now. Don't wait for someone to cut you that check. If that idea is already inside of you, then let it come out. You know what I mean? But don't let it come out in a way that, for example, don't share the IP with somebody. Don't share that story with someone unless you actually have it protected. Many young artists and many young writers, especially, want to share their manuscript with me, and I tell them, slow down. That is not, and like you have to be careful with that, because you just let anybody read your stuff. You're putting your IP out there, and if it's not copywritten, somebody can literally run with that idea. So protect your ideas, protect your intellectual properties, and start writing and start drawing now.
That is some wonderful advice. Okay. One last question, because now I'm curious about those Borinqueña action figures. What's up, man?
So that's right here. So this is right here. So Boss Fight Studios teamed up with us. We have a line of action figures that are actually going to come out this fall. So we're excited about that. And these action figures include La Borinqueña, there's on this side. Include the next spinoff, which is Luz. This is Otto, the character that my son co-created. and La Gálgora, that's the first supervillain that we introduced. And these action figures are actually coming out also around the same time that the hardcover is coming out. So it's just kind of like, the stars are aligning. It's gonna be a happy Christmas for everybody.
Dude, that is awesome. Action figures and a book. Oh, dude, that's great. A big thank you to Edgardo, and a big thank you to everybody that joined us for this live stream. If you're checking it out later, the link to the Zoop crowdfund is in the description of the video if you want to check it out, and I strongly suggest that. Big thank you to Jordan for helping us put this together, and everyone stay healthy and safe out there. And thank you, sir, dude. This was fun. It's fun. It's fun to reminisce about all the hustle we did to get comics too. I ain't gonna lie.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Amar. Have a